checked in with everybody. Everybody who's here is here. So what we'll do, we'll call to the order today being June 14th, and we'll call to order the Cybersecurity Commission. This meeting is being held fully in person, and for the record, do we have a quorum? We do not. Oh, we do. Oh, 4. Okay. 5 of us, sorry. We do have a quorum. Quorum is present. So what we have, if everybody's got their agenda laid out and in their packet, we have approval of the May 4th minutes. I'll entertain a motion to approve the May 4th minutes. Representative Elkins makes a motion to move minutes. Any discussion? Representative Renew's motion to approve minutes from the May 4th meeting. All those in favor say aye. 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 Motion carries. What we have today, everyone, is we've got our training wheels on now, I think, and so we appreciate we've got MNIT here to provide an update, and really this is to walk through as in the formation of the Security Commission, and the importance of it is to build the structure in the organization and the process to make sure that we can communicate effectively to the legislative body, thus to the public, in as transparent manner as possible, but also to move into and test drive a closed session so we can begin to get insight, and the executives that run our technology within the state can share with the legislative body to understand the importance of cybersecurity and what we need to do to understand the threats upon us and to be able to collaborate in an open manner and to be able to communicate effectively. And as we then legislate, govern, as we direct resource policies, to make sure that this is probably the greatest threat that we have to every facet of what we have in government today, and it's a growing threat, and it's certainly not going to diminish. So with that today, we're going to go into the public portion of it. Welcome everybody, and welcome Commissioner Tomes and staff. We have an update that they're going to provide. So Commissioner Tomes, please state your name and position for the record. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Karan and committee members. For the record, my name is Tarek Tomes, and I am the Chief Information Officer for the state of Minnesota and the Commissioner of Minnesota IT Services. Really appreciate being here. Appreciate your introduction and just framing up certainly the work that this committee is engaged in, and really want to just thank this committee for the meetings that we have followed and the meetings that have been held. I don't recall right offhand if this is the 3rd or 4th or which meeting it is, but the conversation has been tremendous, and certainly the work that this committee is doing is incredibly important. And we are incredibly appreciative of its existence and being able to share and certainly always be a resource as it relates to this really critical topic. I'm going to offer just real brief, just a couple of comments, and then I'll turn it over to our Chief Information Security Officer, Rohit Tandon, to go through a few slides. The work that we do from a cyber perspective, as you are well aware, as it relates to government, is unbelievably intense, and it is unbelievably relentless. And the threat that we face in government is one that's replicated beyond government. It's replicated really in every facet of our lives. It is replicated, in our personal lives, with our families, with our children. It is replicated in the private sector, in all organizations. Certainly, critical infrastructure, and certainly throughout government. And both in my role as the CIO for the state of Minnesota and just in a personal role, my concern, both nationally and certainly within the state of Minnesota, related to the cyber threats that we face and the increasing cyber threats that we face is immense. And as such, the existence of a body like this to have these important conversations, to help ask critical questions, to help create paths forward are, I think, unbelievably important. One of the really, really big concerns, certainly as it relates to government, is just our ability throughout public sector to protect and respond to cyber events. And that concern is really more related to just resourcing. and resourcing, not just, in terms of financial resourcing, but resourcing in terms of experience and knowledge and scarcity of cyber professionals in Minnesota. If you think about the large scale of what we're facing, cities, counties, schools, tribal nations, critical infrastructure, not all of those organizations are well-resourced. Many organizations throughout Minnesota actually don't have an ability to staff cyber professionals full-time. There are dual-hatted roles, and as such, the challenge that those organizations face is really immense. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Rohit Tandon, who will walk you through an update from MNIT. Thank you.
Commissioner Tom. So good morning, Chair Karan and members. My name is Rohit Tandon. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Minnesota IT Services. And absolutely. Just a quick check. Is that better?
Yes.
Perfect. So for the agenda today, I'm going to just, Commissioner Tom shared the opening remarks. I'm going to cover a few areas, specifically focusing on what's the national prioritization that we are seeing as a nation reacting to, and then delve into some threats that are very relevant. And there's research that I'll highlight that shows what these are. These are open source intelligence that we've gathered here to try and present the threat landscape as we see it. And then closing remarks for any questions that may be present at that point in time. So when you're looking at it at a national level, as a nation, cybersecurity is continuously getting more and more prioritization. The transition from many organizations that were on site, I'm glad to be on site again today, to the remote work from home, clearly brought more technology to the forefront. And with that technology to the forefront, there's a lot more dependency on the technologies. And recognizing that is where these actions that are listed here really highlight how cybersecurity is so critical for those technology functions to serve those that are either customers or Minnesotans depending on critical services. For example, the first one here is the White House issued an executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. Now, their focus in that executive order was clearly on federal agencies and driving that maturity as a nation at the federal level to raise their security posture on multiple facets, from collaboration to better architecture to more threat intelligence sharing, public-private partnerships, a spectrum that is really relevant and quite comprehensive, and brought that to the forefront on the national level, at the federal level. But marrying that on the private sector side of things, the SEC proposed rules in the last few months here requiring clarity on risk management, strategy, and really how incidents are reported to investors in public companies. Because it's a cybersecurity risk that impacts business ability to operate. And they see that as an investor awareness on knowing if you're going to invest in a public company, you should have a better understanding of what risks you're accepting. And that will raise the bar for board-level conversations for further investments in cybersecurity in any entity that's seeking public investment in their organizational growth or direction. So that, I think, has brought it to the forefront as well. And then the geopolitical climate really brought CISA issuing an alert, kind of an unprecedented alert, on critical infrastructure threats that they were observing reconnaissance around. That, I think, impacts every one of us close to home. We all depend on critical infrastructure. There's 16 sectors from facilities to healthcare to transportation to nuclear facilities. I mean, the risk is quite significant there. And our water that we're consuming and drinking every day is also considered critical infrastructure. And as we're seeing these trends and prioritization happening from public and private, Gartner, which gathers kind of the spend that's happening, has also seen a 12% increase in cybersecurity investment by the spectrum of organizations that I just touched on. And it's expected to continue to grow in 2022. So recognizing that cybersecurity is becoming such a priority in everything that we do from just our daily lives is really a recognition, and I think this body here is displaying that interest and prioritization as well. So when you look at what attacks is driving that recognition and the maturity that we all are seeking to gain here, ransomware is clearly top of mind, and it continues to be a conversation in all media articles, and we've experienced that at home, close to home, Minnesota, in other places as a nation, as a state as well. So how prevalent is it? Now, there's this research that's called the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report. It's published annually and has been published for the last 15 years. So clearly has credibility in terms of how they are gathering this data to present this metric here. And they collect incidents and investigations that are happening across the world. And they have thousands of them gathered. And then they mine that data to look for what trends are they seeing of relevance to inform cyber defenders to proactively pivot themselves for tomorrow's attacks and threats that may be out there. And ransomware, which is kind of the bar graph you're seeing on the line graph you're seeing on the right there, really shows that significant growth that's come in the last year, almost doubling from the 13% of all investigations that they're investigating to 25%. So that's a quarter of the security incidents that they've pooled in a database and are kind of mining for how bad is it out there that we need to be informed about. And this is not targeting sensitive data. So it's not targeting if you have patient information, financial information. They're simply targeting critical functions that you're doing because their intent is to disrupt those functions in order to extort a ransom so that they can recover those services for you to proceed in doing the business that you normally would be doing to serve your customers. And the dwell time, and that metric I think I want to expand on a little bit more. Dwell time is a measure of the point of entry. If you start the clock when somebody enters your infrastructure to the point that you have known that they're there. Now, ransomware, by its very nature, is not trying to be covert. They want to cause that impact. So they become quite explicit in causing that impact and being identified, is 5 days. So 5 days from the point of entry to the point that you're experiencing outages and impairments is quite a fast pace. Many organizations need to have resources to contain, to eject, to eradicate the threat actor. And 5 days, which may involve weekends when they're very active, is a very short period. So the speed at which you need to respond from the point of entry, and this metric really highlights their efficiency in executing and how we as defenders need to be so fast to the point of entry to remove them before an impact is caused. And if you look at that point of entry, 90%, and this metric is in all the investigations that they have looked at, are using 3 core points of entry into your infrastructure. And if you were to defend, this is where you should focus your attention. And every organization that has a cybersecurity team really has to pay attention to what are we doing to protect these 3 points of entry. The first one, which is about 40%, is stolen credentials are being used to access remote access infrastructure for administrative functions. That's their point of entry. Once they've entered, they have to move laterally quickly to try and cause the most amount of harm and lock as many devices as they can. But the point of entry, if they were stopped at the door, is having things like MFA that protect you from them getting past stolen credentials. Phishing, now if you have MFA, it doesn't mean you're protected. Many organizations have employees and staff that function with email. We all function with email on a daily basis. And their awareness of this threat to be able to detect and report so that they don't fall victim to an attachment or a link that lets these threat actors bypass those defenses that you have put at the front door. And email is 35%, where phishing is 35%. And you can see that that large percentage now, 70+%, 75%, 3/4 of them are entering through these vectors. And the final one, which is a lower percentage, but really brute forcing. Many infrastructure systems have external applications that are available for either support or customers, and these web applications are intentionally available on the internet to provide those services. And brute forcing credentials in there is one other way that they can try and pivot. So 90% of them could potentially be stopped if you have good defenses in these 3 spaces. And to Commissioner Tome's point earlier, resourcing is needed across as a nation, as a state, and many organizations are challenged to try and move the ball in these 3 spaces. And the report that's presented here does have a heavier weight on small and medium-sized businesses. So you kind of see that being presented here, where those organizations, less resourced, more vulnerable to these 3 common attack tactics that are succeeding for ransomware. And a quarter of them are therefore becoming impacted by ransomware. And when you look at the impact, that's caused to the business or the public entity that's experiencing ransomware, more than 55, almost 59% of them take more than a month to recover. That's a long window for an outage for any organization to experience. And in those cases, they may have to make the tough decision to pay the ransom, which is highly discouraged, but yet they are in a position where they have to restore operations and make that decision. And even those ransom payments have increased 78%. So while the demands, as you might be hearing in some media articles, the large numbers that are out there, that's not the norm. The average that they're paying is a little over $500,000. And it's really gone quite significantly higher in the last 1 year, 78% higher, that these threat actors know that to restore operations in less than a month, which may not restore fully, you may still have some impacts from restoration, but at least your operational state at a certain cost. And this continues to propel the business model that these ransomware operators are taking advantage of in this situation. So 1/4 of attacks, again, ransomware really is a big threat that's facing as a nation and every entity and organization operating in this technology world here. The other attack that's kind of gaining a little bit of momentum here is supply chain attacks. Now, this could lead to a ransomware, but if you look at what the mission might be, it could be different. It could be just to gather intellectual property. It could be to gather intelligence. There are other factors that may drive it. But 2021, with the same report kind of presenting this, saw a significant increase in third-party or partner attacks. Now, if you look deeper under the covers, what drove that significant growth? And many of you may have heard of this, SolarWinds. Now, SolarWinds is a private organization that provides solutions, technology solutions, to technology operators like data centers, cloud services, which are used to monitor infrastructure, monitor network. So it's an IT back-end function technology that's provided to measure the health of your operating environment. And that technology, by that very nature, is deployed in sensitive areas, has sensitive access to measure the health of servers, of applications. And this specific product, the Orion product specifically, had a supply chain attack injected by an advanced adversary, where they injected code in the pipeline for development that ultimately became a software update and got pushed out by 18,000 plus public and private entities to manage their technology, essentially giving this advanced attacker a back door into any technology system. And that scale is what you're seeing in the report. Now, many threat actors see this behavior and learn from it. And there might be copycat or other similar attacks in the future that propagate from this realization that there's an opportunity here, because defenders are recognizing those 3 vectors of ransomware attack. Those ransomware operators are starting to pivot and try and leverage these other avenues to try and bypass those 3 defenses that are now in place by many organizations, having learned over the years. While that might have been the largest number of impact, I think the NotPetya attack, which is a 2017, to give you a little background on this one, the NotPetya attack was actually a target against a Ukrainian entities where a certain software for tax had injected a malware component to it. And that malware then would scan networks and then move laterally from that network to other devices that had that same potential exploit feasibility. Now, it was targeted and delivered to Ukrainian businesses by an advanced attacker, but because of the way it moved laterally on the network, it started scanning public internet. And many organizations, those listed on the right here on that graph, on that table, were some of those that experienced because they had externally exposed devices that were vulnerable to that attack. And some very, very large organizations, names that you might recognize here because it's a international, FedEx, Merck, shipping company Merck, was impacted. I mean, these are almost $100 billion entities that experienced really, really large sums of cost in restoration and recovery and potential lost revenue from a spillover attack that wasn't even targeted at them. But because of the way our interconnected world works, an attack on one organization could easily spill over to any entity that is connected to that organization. A supply chain was how it was infused and then spread across the world, causing significant impact to many, many organizations. The other one I want to call out is cyber espionage. Now, this one is not trying to cause any impact like a ransomware or supply chain that is visible, but is primarily trying to gain intelligence. And that intelligence is really depending on their mission. So their mission outcome could be varying, depends on who the actor is. And there's this Mandiant report that does similar type of research as the Verizon DBIR, the Data Breach Investigation report, just published a few weeks ago, that really highlights the scale of this type of activity. And our Chinese nation actors that are quite active in this space have been active since 2016. So as they're identifying the different threat groups, trying to correlate the behaviors of one actor to the other based on the techniques that they're seeing, that is it the same actor or is it a new actor? They've seen 244 total groups that are performing this type of activity. A large number if you think about it, but just in the last 1 year, some of these groups come to life, achieve their mission, or lose their ability to execute and go offline, but others maintain continuity. And 36 of them have been continuously active in 2021. Where are they focusing? Well, clearly they're focusing all over the world, but the US continues to be a target. About 15% of their activity is targeting at US businesses, US organizations, and government organizations have been of steady interest for them since 2018. So we're seeing this interest in government entities, but also private entities that might offer intellectual property, research material that might empower them to be more competitively advantageous position by stealing and reusing the research that has been hard-earned by some of these entities. So it's really aligned with the economic output that they are trying to drive for their nation. And these threat actors are very well resourced, quite capable, and have large teams that can continue to maintain that persistent threat over time. The last one, which kind of seems frustrating but is continuously out there, is denial of service attacks. Now, this isn't trying to steal property. It's not trying to cause an outage to your systems that is going to be extorted for ransom. It's more just limiting the availability of critical services. And now we are seeing that spinning off into a ransom demand in some situations. But on average, the top 5 industries that are targeted, public administration is one of those top 5 that continues to appear in this list. There are other industry sectors that experience this too, but finance, information, and manufacturing are kind of the top that are experiencing this denial of service attacks. These organizations, many of them don't experience this daily, but on average, if you look at the average counts, it's 10 per year. So you could almost say 1 a month that you have to deal with. And the scale of these attacks has continued to grow. If you look at the 2013 numbers, it was under 500 megabits per second. Now they're talking 3 times that, 1.3 gigs. There are some that are extremely large in terabits, but those are rare and uniquely targeted. The average organization is experiencing a 1.3 gig in terms of the bandwidth that's being consumed. Now, the intent of this is to make resources unavailable. They're not trying to cause any confidential information to be stolen. And they last about 4 hours, which has a recovery time beyond the 4 hours that could maybe spill into a day's worth of activity, where there's some impaired functionality of critical services that you're offering customers or Minnesotans in our case, for services that have become more technology dependent and resources are being dependent on to provide these services externally. And if you look at all these threats that we are seeing kind of building these patterns, those 4 types of attacks as a trend affecting the industry, they are affecting Minnesota. So CISA issued a warning last year about ransomware targeting food and agriculture companies. Within the same month, maybe weeks after, ransomware attacks compromised a farm co-op and a food processor that had Minnesota presence, affecting our employees from being able to get to their day jobs, to perform their duties, and of course supply chain impacts probably rippled from that as well, as an outcome from that. And DDoS is not something we at Minnesota government have also experienced as well. The civil and social unrest in 2020 did target all levels of government, and Minnesota state government was a government target as well. And we had unprecedented volume for 14 consecutive days of DDoS attacks targeting our infrastructure, and had to maintain those critical services that were needed at that point in time to make sure that Minnesotans got access to COVID information or pandemic response activities or unemployment if they were depending on those resources at that point in time. To support that financial need to areas that are low funded, federal cybersecurity grant is called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, provided $1 billion nationwide for the 4-year period of fiscal year 22 to 25. Now, Minnesota gets a percentage of that, and 18 million federal funds are available after a 5.7 million state match. Now, 80% of this funding is intended to go and benefit local, tribal, territorial governments, places where there's low resources. So it's really trying to drive maturity kind of at the lowest common denominator to raise the bar for all, because we are all interconnected. And if we can elevate security in these spaces, it elevates it for all of us because of the supply chain example that I referenced earlier. How these funds are used is going to be driven by a planning committee, and there is expected guidance from CISA in the summer of 2020. Now, we have continuously been in active conversation with CISA and other state entities within Minnesota as well as other states to learn about how they can provide and how we can collectively provide better services to achieve the outcome of this investment that we're going to share. But we're waiting for guidance from CISA to be formalized before we can act on that going forward. And that planning committee must include representatives from state, counties, cities, towns, public health, public education, and tribal, the benefactors of this grant, must have a seat at the table to provide frontline information that can influence how these investments will provide the significant value that it needs to raise the security posture. And there are some additional criteria on how the planning committee can be structured, but it is expected that half of them that are members of this planning committee have experience in cybersecurity or IT, because they will bring on the ground level information that will dictate how we can, as a whole nation, as a whole state, move the cybersecurity posture forward for all communities that are dependent on this grant. I want to pass this back to Commissioner Tomes or open for questions at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Karan and committee members. With that, we'd like to open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Tan. Thank you, Commissioner Tomes. And members, questions? Representative Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on that last, the planning committee here, just a point of clarification, is this on a state-by-state level, where there's an expectation that a planning committee with this makeup is created at each state, or is this one committee at national level that's making this decision?
Representative Lucero, committee members, it is state by state. Each state that is taking advantage of this grant opportunity has its own planning group specifically targeted towards the needs of that particular state.
Representative Lucero, follow
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then, so when is the deadline that this committee must be formed? And I don't recall having formed this in this last legislative session. If you could confirm that, and if we have not yet formed it, when is the deadline that it must be formed?
Commissioner Tomes.
Representative Lucero, we've begun the initial stages of forming this committee. We're going to build on the membership within the TAC and then build that out. And so we've already begun the formal part. It is dependent on our ability to provide those matching funds that certainly were a part of our supplemental budget change item, and as such, there's tremendous urgency for us. But even that funding withstanding, we're going to move forward with getting that committee formalized. There's going to be tremendous value in having that body that has such broad representation, and you could expect to see that in the coming months.
Good. Senator Wickland.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question kind of following on the organization of that planning committee. Do you see that as something then that we can be developing to be an ongoing resource in, maybe not strictly just the narrow function of approving grants or the grant process? Can we make it into something that can benefit us as an information sharing or other tasks that we might obligate to them?
Commissioner Tomes.
Senator Wickland, committee members, I absolutely see, just as we saw with the work that the Blue Ribbon Council on Information Technology and now the TAC, I absolutely see a long-standing benefit for a body that has such broad cross-representation, and also includes membership beyond that. We've discussed adding CISOs from private sector organizations, making sure that we have a connectivity to the cyber community that is responsible for critical infrastructure that is not directly government-related, and certainly not the grant funding withstanding, but I think having a body such as that helps advise related to how we can help secure and protect Minnesota from a cyber perspective, I think has a tremendous amount of benefit.
Senator Wickland, follow-up?
Yeah, and then I guess, so the planning guidance that we haven't gotten from the federal government, do you expect that that will include timelines for establishment or, certain requirements that have dates attached to them? Or do you have any sense of that yet?
Commissioner Tomes or Mr. Rohit? Or
That's
Mr. Tannen?
Thank you, Chair members. That's correct. We do anticipate some clarity in terms of timeline. Now, it's anticipated the first year might be an opportunity for the planning committee to unite and collectively build that plan that's going to benefit all of the state, the whole of state. So the funding could provide initial opportunity to try and grow that planning exercise with good knowledge that's going to be collected through that exercise to make sure that it's targeting where there's biggest benefit from future investments.
Senator Wickland, follow-up?
Yeah, just a comment. I hope that we can do a good job in the kind of the planning for that planning committee, because I think that's an area we've identified within the TAC as being lacking, that we have method for entities across the state to share information and to communicate, plus to make sure that some of the cybersecurity practices are getting out to everybody that needs them. And then just one other question about the presentation. Do you know, you mentioned a couple of the different areas that are affecting Minnesota. Do any of these reports break down by geography at all, these attacks, or are they pretty much just kind of a compilation and it's difficult to, it'd just be interesting to me to know if there's more of a geographic breakdown of some of this information.
Commissioner Tannen?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair members. That's correct. The geography on this is actually worldwide. So there are regional by continents, by operating entities that might collaborate more closely together. And we do see these patterns apply at a national level. Generally speaking, what's impacting a neighboring state is most likely impacting our state. And what's impacting Eastern Europe or other parts of Asia is impacting the United States. So we do see the commonalities, but there is a breakdown, at least on a global scale, of where there might be more interest, especially when it comes to things like cyber espionage, which are targeting regions that are of more key interest to the economic drivers of those entities performing that espionage.
Senator Wickland? Okay. Commissioner Tomes?
I was just going to add, Senator Wickland, committee members, one of the things with these types of reports, and I don't recall if we were making a copy available for the committee members, but if not, we will absolutely make sure that the committee members have copies of these reports at your disposal. But, they're pretty dramatically underreported. As you can imagine, most organizations, just due to, fear of reputational damage, the ones that we hear about are really the big ones that maybe involve, breach notification needs. But whatever the statistics are and however frightening the statistics currently are, you can add magnitudes to that for the number of incidents that are not reported by organizations.
Thank you, Commissioner Tomes. Representative Elkins? Representative Elkins, are you mic on?
Yeah, I've been in, this is my first time in this room.
Out of practice?
Out of practice, yes. We were expecting kind of a wave of cyber attacks by Russia as part of the invasion of Ukraine, and there hasn't been much about it in the press. Is that because we anticipated the nature of the attacks, or just that it's just not making it into the press?
Commissioner Tannen?
Right. So thank you for that question, Chair and members. So that's a good question. What we are hearing are certain targeted attacks within the regions of interest for them. Our initial concern was spillover attack, like that NotPetya attack. That did not materialize to impacting geography regions within the United States. Now, we did see some Eastern Europe area that I think are publicized as well.
Yep.
We can dig deeper into those if there's interest. But the other kind of follow-on from that was targeting critical infrastructure that may be of interest. Now, the motivations behind the Russian operational and strategy are unclear. Our intent was to put our shields up, as CISA and other federal entities advised, in the unlikely or maybe likely event in that scenario that they do pivot and target other regions because of the sanctions impacting them. Those haven't been exercised to the degree that we have seen or anticipated, but we have to continue to stay active in defending, and our shields must remain up in case there is an interest in their strategy to pivot and change directions.
Yeah, I was kind of.
Representative Elkins, follow?
Yeah, follow. I just kind of was expecting that they might go after utilities, for example, or pipeline companies, again, things like that, and that hasn't been anything like that in the press at all.
Commissioner Thomas?
Representative Elkins, and I apologize, just going to kind of err maybe on the overly cautious side of this, but I'd love to come back to that when we go into the closed door session.
Thank you,
that
Commissioner
particular
Jones.
question.
Thank you.
Commissioner Thomas, just a comment from the, when we look at the definition of the Planning Commission composition, what it is, it really is the Technology Advisory Council. So I think for us to look outside of that or beyond that would further strain our ability to communicate effectively, and I think it represents every group. And so if we can work it within it in a subgroup or as a component of it, not only for this, not only for the grants that come along with it, but I think it's a natural progression of the inclusion that we have to have private sector, right? The private sector is already in the Technology Advisory Council. I think it's just an expansion of focus or refinement of focus that's going to be necessary regardless of grants or dollars that come through, whether they're federal or state or whatever we do in our investments. We need to, I would hope that we all share the same view that we have the structure that exists today that will work very well. To replicate it or create another group, I think will be difficult to source and then to coordinate and operate effectively. So hopefully I think we're all on the same page there. So let's figure out if there's any barriers to that besides the money. Right now, we're dealing with all of those things. Then the other question I had, so when we talked about cybersecurity threats, and I remember, I think 2019, last time I was a part of one of the national security updates, and all threats lead to a common country. They just look very diverse and where they're emitted from. But you talked about supply chain. But one thing you didn't talk about is really just the hardware technology side of it. And what do we need to be aware of as citizens in this state, and what can we do? Chip manufacturing. You talk about embedded applications. We typically just lead to the software side in sharing of that. But, we love those things that if we're tracking them, what does that mean for the average citizen or us in the state and citizens of just the chip manufacturing and the embedded threats that can be in the hardware? When I look at it, I see an ominous future when I attend broadband conferences and they tell us that every single thing we buy that consumes electricity, whether it be battery or direct AC, will be Wi-Fi enabled. And so what does that mean? What do we have to do to be prepared for that? I think we're talking about it globally, but I think we need to make sure that what are we doing to check? What are we doing to create within the state of Minnesota sourcing chip manufacturing? How do we create a better economic environment to make sure those things are stateside or move back onshore? Has that been a part of the conversation? Because I didn't see it in any piece. I think it's embedded in there somewhere. But is that as big a threat as it could appear to be, or is it a larger threat than what we're talking about and what we know today? So,
I can hear you. All right.
Commissioner Tannen?
Thank you, Chair and members. So that's a very good question regarding hardware supply, and I think maybe I'll call out in the last few months, almost a year plus, there has been supply shortages that have caused impacts in recognizing what all has a chip inside it. And the chip shortages are impacting supply of resources in general, but really highlighting that these manufacturing that's happening is in geographically dense areas that are being produced and delivered all over the world. majority of these hardware chips are dependent on software in some fashion. There's a firmware that's got on it that makes it function. And you're right that sometimes there could be backdoors that are hardware driven embedded in there. And that threat continues to be an obvious one that's out there. And my opinion on that would be those are more advanced nations that are most likely to execute on those types of threats. It wouldn't be the ransomware operator who's using at scale type of attacks available. So I think the recognition that that's there and continues to be a threat is clearly of interest, and our awareness of making sure that our supply chain has good security measures built in, not just software, but also how hardware is signed off and delivered inside or embedded in this laptop or any laptop, has gone through some rigorous checks and balances to make sure there wasn't some infiltration along the way trying to get that through. So I think it's a whole ecosystem that has to work together to make sure that everything is certified and validated on the way to the consumer at the end of the day that's depending on that device.
Thank you, Commissioner Tannen. And I would agree. Appreciate you expanding on, because it really is not just what's contained within it, but its pure availability and its impact on our ability to build cars and every facet of the dependency on technology in every facet of our life. And so I love technology, but I don't know that it needs to be applied everywhere. Some basic functions of life, and what do we do in the backup? You know, those are the things that it put us at greater risk for everything you just described in the ecosystem of technology, but going down to the manufacturer. And so I think it would be a good component as we move forward to make sure that everybody really understands the threats. And so we as legislators not only work on cybersecurity, but what are those things that we do to create an economic environment to try and get some of those things? What can we drive in Minnesota to create the supply chain or just the availability of technology and chips and the hardware, but then the ability to hopefully more thoroughly examine what's contained within every product as it's manufactured and distributed throughout our society. So, thank you. Members, any other questions? Representative Bonner, welcome. I didn't have any further questions, and so what I'd like to do then, we have a couple things in our agenda. As we look at, actually, before we move into item number 4, we just talked about a variety of things. You know, the dependency in the ecosystem, and the reason we're here is, one, today we're hopefully going to start removing our training wheels on moving in what we are in state government with a private or closed session. Every member here, our ability to function or add the greatest value is going to be dependent on our ability to adhere to our rules that we're going to agree upon. And from a secrecy perspective and the ability to share openly from the responsibilities the Commissioner has and as it relates to Minnesota and our state government, but also to be able to attract and make sure we get open communication to all of our industries, you know, whether it be industry, agriculture, or energy, agriculture, our other municipal governments, to the financial institution, National Guard. They're also a member, right? And we've had conversations with them. So members, as we look at our future, for our next meeting, what is there in industry that stands out that we would like to invite and then bring them in for both a open and or closed door session to understand or to start to build the communication necessary that we understand the impact to our entire economy as it relates to cybersecurity and the threats before us. So just a comment, if anybody wants, share those, and then we'll make sure that's part of our next agenda item. Anybody else? Representative Sarah?
Well, to answer that question, I think it goes related to what Senator Wickland was asking earlier regarding geography of attacks.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that answer is going to be not necessarily geographic based, but industry based. Mm-hmm. So we in Minnesota here, so there are clearly industries that are more susceptible to attack and industries that are less susceptible, or maybe higher target would be a better way to put it. Yeah. Higher target versus a lesser target. And so we in Minnesota here, then we have to be concerned about, well, what are our industries? Mm-hmm. And clearly among those industries is manufacturing, whether it be medical device manufacturing or other forms of manufacturing. And in my experience, manufacturing has a unique area of vulnerability because unlike operating systems, let's just say a Windows-based operating system, where it's the patching to remediate vulnerabilities is pushed out by Microsoft, for example. But when it comes to manufacturing, these devices are all unique, and the firmware on them isn't standardized. And so there's a great deal of vulnerability out there. And so anyway, to answer the chair's question, I think among the industries that we should bring in are manufacturing, maybe specifically device manufacturing, but there are other types of manufacturing in Minnesota. And then to brainstorm, what are the other industries, maybe the top 5 industries that we have here in Minnesota?
Yeah. Thank you, Representative Lucero. And I think it is going to be good to inventory and start to bring light to those, and then to identify for us the unique risks, or not the unique risks, but the risk, each of the risks that are posed to them and its impact on our economy. So, and seasonally it matters too, right? Energy, January energy is a little bit more critical, or maybe on a day like today when it's going to be 100 degrees, those threats become more ominous than a typical cool spring day from a health perspective and safety. With that, anybody else, any other comments? Representative Bonner.
I was going to add, I think I had the privilege of attending a conference or having a meeting with a number of the insurance advisors, and particularly they were talking a great deal about business insurance and about coverage for things like cyber attacks and so forth. And I think certainly in terms of prioritization, we can certainly go at the top of the list because those make sense. I think Representative Lucero is right. But my understanding from that meeting is that what we're seeing is that it's pretty widespread at the moment. And that there's real concerns that some of those insurance policies are having to change their policy or pull back because and maybe perhaps not even be able to cover fully some of the damage caused. So I think it's something that we definitely need to address because I think businesses are certainly purchasing that insurance with the intent to try and make sure that they're covering their business. But the reality is it seems like it's starting to permeate, particularly probably with ransomware as a service, for example. We're seeing it more readily happening across the board in various industries from small to mid to large-sized businesses. So it's certainly something we should consider.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Bonner, and I agree. So my career has been in the technology, but the last was in financial payments to government. And so the evolution of EMV, it all starts with Target. At least they're the brand where the industry's finally decided that the cost of transformation of the technology in every facet of it also created where the emergence of the insurance, but also the expectations and criteria and requirement in which they must operate under to maintain that insurance. But I do agree that I think it's a great link to everything we do and the threats beyond or before us. So I think what we shall do is continue to build out kind of our core industries and then start to build into our agenda those that we'll invite, and one, for an education, and then two, how do we effectively communicate and its ties or dependency on Minnesota's, our economy and technology. So members, any other questions? Excellent. So with that, what's that? Yes. Okay. I did move to item 3. So the election of a secretary. So the election of the secretary, we need to do that before we move on. And if we don't elect one, I think the chair becomes that one, the secretary. So we need to elect a secretary, and in the role and documenting our closed meetings, recording of the meeting provided with LCC with our records within 7 days. Those are going to be the criteria to be able to operate. So we would seek, if anybody's interested in doing that, I will assume that we'll see a bunch of dinosaur hands, very short limbs during this process, but it will also change. So anybody who is the secretary, it will change in January when the new leadership takes over, and it will move to the opposing body. So the secretary, regardless of who it is. So if anybody's interested, please stand now or forever hold your peace. I will assume the dinosaur hands are the same as when a receipt or the bill comes for dinner. I'll remember that. But I'll assume the role of the secretary, and just so we move. If we have to take a role, somebody would like to nominate me if we required.
I will nominate Chair Karan.
Representative Bonner nominates Chair Coran. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. So I will be the secretary for moving forward into our closed sessions. And again, we have to thank Michelle Weber and all of our staff, all the staff to put together all of our documents and make it easy for us to function and do the things that we need, especially for this commission and all others that they're involved in. So with the election, our intentions go into a closed meeting per Minnesota Statutes 3.888, subdivision 5. And so under that, the subdivision 5, the commission intends to go into recess and go into a closed session after a 15-minute break. During the closed session, the commission will hear an overview minute, and we'll discuss all the topics that we would choose. It would compromise the cybersecurity of the state of Minnesota. And the subject to be discussed during this closed meeting, it's in our packets. We have, we're going to get an update. It really is just for a minute and to talk about those things that we can share
Mr. Chair?
and discuss current threat levels.
Yeah, before we take the
Representative Elkins?
motion, I noticed that Mr. Heller is,
Yep.
wanted to pose a question to us, perhaps.
Mr. Heller, if you could make a brief comment or question. We didn't intend to take other testimony, but
He took his notes during the meeting for you.
okay.
Oh, okay. Great, thank you.
Mr. Heller, if you could make a brief comment.
Thank you, Chair Coran, and members of the Legislative Commission on Cybersecurity. Mr. Heller speaking here today on June 14th, 2022. I gave you a handout. I have reviewed the documents online. Ms. Weber, I'd ask that you check those. The ones at least you created. Minute needs to fix their first page with their PowerPoint. And draft rules with structure and underlying language does not meet 508 PDF compliance, accessibility, including the HTML page. You'll find that on, because you have a statement 80AA on 96 to 98 on draft rules, closed meeting, you mentioned members for accessibility, but you never mentioned the public. Regarding that, I ask you to consider putting the public in there as well. Today,
Mr. Heller, on the closed meeting is specifically for members of the commissioner or those that are invited from the private sector that, as it relates to topics of cybersecurity, thus the reason, the statutory reason for, and the ability to have a closed meeting.
just like me speaking here, you don't typically, you don't have a policy to take public testimony. It is a commission, and most commissions allow public testifying for feedback. I appreciate this opportunity to express that. Transparency, security, and digital accessibility is all relevant to the intended audiences out there. I unofficially represent the twice eligible, also known sometimes as the twice exceptional and print disabled. So anyhow, I just thought I'd bring that up. I think it's really important that if you're going to go in a private meeting now, for instance, you don't post outside your door today the meeting's going on. When I went online, just when I came in the meeting, about 10 or 15 minutes late, again, that was not posted on the door. You don't have a page here. I can't get stuff to you in a timely manner. I think that's all relevant, that you get a little feedback during the meeting. Not that I'm taking up your time. It's very valuable. Once again, you have the notes I provided. I will send those in a more understandable way than a screenshot. But I think you could polish this up a little bit more for transparency, security, and digital accessibility. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. You're a great advocate for the community, and the government does need to continue to move better and make sure that the accessibility and those things are done. And we will take your advisement, and we'll continue to work to do better. Thank you, Mr. Howard.
Thanks, Chair. I would appreciate that somehow you would embed in that you would have an agenda. Obviously, it could be choice of the chair if any public testifiers were going to testify on this. You just don't need to hear from the commercial, but the public at large.
Yeah.
Something that you need to consider in the future if you're going to be a commission. I know it's not for citizens, however, this impacts citizens. Thank you again for this
Yeah.
opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Heller. Members, with that, we will continue to move on. So prior to recess, we also, we get 2 procedural items that we need to do. So we have a vote. So in your packets, you also have the adoption of, you have a copy of the confidentiality strip for closed meetings. This is something that we'll read, the secretary will read before the beginning of each closed-door meeting. And then secondarily, we also have the motion to go into closed session. And we must have a majority vote to move into closed session. And then the full commission plans to adjourn during the closed meeting and will not be returning to this room. And the location of the closed meeting is in your packets for all members invited to the meeting. And so with that, in the packet, you have the confidentiality script for closed meetings. I will entertain a motion to adopt that. Representative Elkins makes a motion to adopt the confidentiality script. Any comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Second item on the, that we need to vote for is to entertain a motion to go into closed session.
Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion to move that we go into a closed session.
Representative Bonner makes a motion to go into closed session. Any comments? All those in favor of that motion, say aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. All right, so we will, the commission, we will go into recess, and the commission is in recess, and we will reconvene in 15 minutes, the location contained in your packets. We're in recess.